The headlights of the worn-out Ford van cut through the darkness of Interstate 40 as George Strait sat in the passenger seat, watching the Tennessee landscape blur past. It was late March 1981, and the air still carried the bite of winter mixed with the promise of spring. Beside him, his bandmate and steel guitarist, Daniel "Danny" Hutchison, gripped the steering wheel with both hands, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "You awake, George?" Danny asked, glancing sideways. George nodded, though exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders. "Yeah, just thinking." "About the showcase?" "About everything." George shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming absently on his knee. "About whether we're doing the right thing. Whether this trip is worth it." They had left San Marcos, Texas, 3 days earlier, playing small venues along the way to scrape together gas money. The van smelled of stale coffee, cigarette smoke, and the distinct mustiness of musical equipment that had seen better days. In the back, 3 other band members slept fitly among the guitars, amplifiers, and suitcases. Ron Cabal on fiddle, Michael Rivera on bass, and their drummer, James Peterson. "Bobby Crawford's place is supposed to be the real deal," Danny said, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "He said he's got connections with MCA Records. Said they're looking for something different." George let out a long breath. "That's what they all say, Danny. We've heard it before. This time feels different, though." "Does it?" George turned to look at his friend. In the dim dashboard light, he could see the determination etched on Danny's face, the same expression he'd worn since they'd formed the Ace in the Hole band back in Texas. Or do we just want it to feel different? Danny was quiet for a moment. Maybe both. The truth was that George felt the weight of every mile they'd traveled. At 38 years old, he wasn't a kid chasing dreams anymore. He was a husband and father with responsibilities, bills that needed paying, and a wife who believed in him even when he struggled to believe in himself. Norma had stayed back in Texas with their 2 children, working her job at a local bank to keep their household afloat, while George chased what sometimes felt like an impossible dream. "You think Norma's doing okay?" George asked suddenly. "She's tough," Danny replied. "She knew what she was signing up for when she married a musician. That's what worries me." George rubbed his face with both hands. "She shouldn't have to be this tough. She shouldn't have to carry everything while I'm out here gambling on maybes." "It's not a gamble if you're good, George, and you are good. Hell, you're better than half the guys getting record deals right now." George wanted to believe that. He'd spent years playing honky-tonks and dance halls across Texas, perfecting his craft, developing a sound that felt true to traditional country music, even as the genre was shifting toward more pop-influenced productions. He sang about real life, real heartbreak, real joy, the kind of songs his heroes like Merle Haggard and George Jones had built careers on. But the industry was changing. Producers wanted something flashy, something that would appeal to a broader audience. They wanted cowboys who looked good on television, singers who could cross over to pop radio. George was just a guy from Texas who loved traditional country music and refused to compromise that vision for anyone. "Exit's coming up," Danny announced, pulling George from his thoughts. "We should be at the motel in about 20 minutes." George nodded, watching as the Nashville city limits sign appeared in the distance. The lights of the city glowed against the night sky, a beacon of both promise and peril. Somewhere in that sprawl of buildings and streets was Bobby Crawford's bar, the showcase that could change everything, and the recording executives who held his future in their hands. Behind them, Ron Cabal stirred awake, his curly hair sticking up at odd angles. "We there yet?" "Almost," Danny called back. "Welcome to Nashville, boys." Ron stretched, his joints cracking audibly. "About damn time. My back feels like I've been sleeping on concrete." That's because you basically have been. Michael Rivera's voice emerged from the darkness, groggy with sleep. James is using you as a pillow. What? Ron twisted around, discovering that James Peterson had indeed curled up against him. Get off me, you big oaf! James jerked awake. What? What's happening? Are we under attack? The absurdity of the moment broke the tension in the van, and even George found himself smiling as his bandmates bickered good-naturedly. These men had followed him from Texas, based on nothing but faith and friendship. They'd slept in their vehicles, eaten cheap food, and played for audiences that sometimes numbered less than 20 people. They deserved success as much as he did. All right, settle down back there, George called out. We're pulling into the motel now. The Magnolia Inn was exactly what they'd expected. A two-story building with peeling paint, a flickering neon sign, and a parking lot that had more potholes than pavement. But it was cheap, and cheap was all they could afford. Danny parked the van near the front office. I'll go check us in. George climbed out, his legs stiff from hours of sitting. The March air was cool but pleasant, carrying the scent of rain and distant barbecue. Nashville at night had a particular energy to it. You could almost feel the music pulsing through the streets, the dreams of thousands of hopeful musicians floating like invisible notes on the breeze. Ron and Michael began unloading their gear, while James lit a cigarette, leaning against the van. So, George, James said, exhaling smoke into the night. You nervous about Wednesday? Wednesday, the showcase, 2 days away. Yeah, George admitted. Wouldn't you be? Hell yeah, I would be. But you've got something special, man. I've been playing with musicians for 15 years, and I've never heard anyone who sounds like you. You've got that real country voice, you know? The kind that makes people feel something. George appreciated the sentiment, but confidence had been in short supply lately. Feeling something doesn't mean much if the record executives don't think it'll sell. Then they're idiots, James said simply. Danny emerged from the office, jangling 2 room keys. Got us 2 rooms, 3 in one, 2 in the other. We can figure out who sleeps where. They hauled their equipment and luggage up to the 2nd floor, their boots echoing on the metal stairs. The rooms were small but clean enough, 2 double beds in each, thin curtains, and a television that only received 3 channels clearly. George ended up sharing a room with Danny and Ron, while Michael and James took the other. After everyone had settled in, George sat on the edge of his bed and pulled out his wallet. Inside was a photo of Norma and their children, their smiling faces a reminder of everything he was fighting for. He picked up the room's phone and dialed home, even though it was past midnight. Norma answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. Hello? Hey, darling. It's me. Sorry for calling so late. George? He could hear her shifting, probably sitting up in bed. Is everything okay? Did you make it to Nashville? Yeah, we just checked into the motel. Wanted to hear your voice before I went to sleep. How was the drive? Long, tiring, but we're here now. He paused, gripping the phone tighter. How are you? How are the kids? We're fine, honey. Don't worry about us. You need to focus on the showcase. I can't help but worry, Norma. You're working so hard, and I'm out here chasing something that might never happen. Stop that, she said firmly. We've talked about this. You have a gift, George Strait, and you owe it to yourself and to everyone who believes in you to see this through. When you get on that stage Wednesday night, I want you to sing like you do when it's just us and the guitar in our living room. Sing from your heart. Her words steadied him, as they always did. Norma had been his anchor since the day they'd met. The one person who never doubted his talent, even when he doubted himself. I love you, he said quietly. I love you too. Now get some rest. You've got work to do. After hanging up, George lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Danny was already snoring softly in the other bed, and Ron was in the bathroom brushing his teeth. Tomorrow they'd scout the venue, meet with Bobby Crawford, and start preparing for the most important performance of George's career. The weight of expectation pressed down on him like a physical force. What if he froze on stage? What if his voice cracked? What if the executives hated his traditional sound? What if this whole trip was just another dead end in a career full of them? But beneath the fear, there was something else. A small, flickering flame of hope that refused to be extinguished. Maybe Danny was right. Maybe this time really was different. George closed his eyes and let exhaustion finally claim him. The sounds of Nashville filtering through the thin motel walls like a lullaby of distant sirens, passing cars, and the faint echo of live music from somewhere in the city. Morning arrived too quickly. George woke to sunlight streaming through the gaps in the curtains and the sound of Danny talking on the phone in hushed tones near the window. He checked his watch. 8:30 in the morning. His body ached from the journey, and his mouth tasted like stale coffee and road dust. "Yeah, Bobby, we'll be there around noon," Danny was saying. "Uh-huh, sounds good. See you then." He hung up and turned to find George watching him. "Good, you're awake." That was Bobby Crawford. He wants to meet us at the bar this afternoon to go over the schedule and let us do a sound check. George sat up, running his hands through his hair. "What's the lineup looking like?" "We're opening. Then there's a singer-songwriter named Katie Nelson doing a set, and the headliner is supposed to be Bradley Hayes." The name hit George like a punch to the gut. Bradley Hayes? The Bradley Hayes? The one and only. Bradley Hayes was everything the modern country music industry wanted. Young, handsome, with a voice that straddled the line between country and pop. He'd had 2 minor hits in the past year and was being groomed as the next big thing. The fact that he was headlining the showcase meant the MCA executives were probably coming specifically to see him, not some unknown Texas musician named George Strait. "Well, hell," George muttered. "No pressure then." Danny sat down on his own bed. "Look, I know what you're thinking, but this could actually work in our favor. The execs will already be there. If we can grab their attention during our set, we'll have just as good a shot as Hayes does. Or they'll spend our entire set thinking about how much better the headliner is going to be." "Or that," Danny admitted. "But we won't know unless we try." Ron emerged from the bathroom, already dressed in jeans and a pearl snap shirt. "I heard Bradley Hayes' name. That guy's voice is smooth as butter. Saw him on television last month. Women go crazy for him." "Thanks for the pep talk, Ron," George said dryly. "Just being honest. But you know what? Smooth isn't always what people want. Sometimes they want real. And you're as real as it gets, George." They gathered the rest of the band and found a diner down the street for breakfast. The place was packed with locals and tourists, the smell of bacon and fresh coffee filling the air. They squeezed into a booth near the back, studying laminated menus that offered everything from biscuits and gravy to country fried steak. A waitress approached. A woman in her 50s with blonde hair piled high, and a name tag that read, Betty. She pulled out a notepad. "What can I get you boys?" they ordered. And as Betty walked away, Michael leaned forward. "So what's the plan? What are we playing Wednesday night?" "I've been thinking about that," George said. "We've got maybe 30 minutes for our set. I want to open with Unwound. It's upbeat, gets people's attention. Then we'll do Fool-Hearted Memory, followed by Amarillo by Morning." "That's a good mix," James said. "Shows your range. The first one's danceable, the second's a ballad, and the third is pure Texas country." "Exactly. I want them to see that I'm not just one thing, that I can do traditional country but make it feel fresh." Danny nodded approvingly. What about the rest of the set? They spent the next hour mapping out the performance, discussing transitions between songs, which instruments would feature prominently in each number, and how to maximize the emotional impact of every minute on stage. Betty kept their coffee cups full and didn't rush them, even though a line was forming at the door. When they finally arrived at Bobby Crawford's bar, a place called the Crossroads, George felt his heart rate kick up a notch. The venue was larger than he'd expected. A converted warehouse with exposed brick walls, a generous stage area, and seating for at least 200 people. A bar ran along one wall, and the wooden dance floor in front of the stage showed the scuff marks of countless boots over the years. Bobby Crawford was behind the bar when they walked in, a man in his early 60s with silver hair, a weathered face, and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore jeans, boots, and a black Western shirt with white piping. "You must be George Strait," Bobby said, extending his hand. "Glad you made it safely." George shook his hand, appreciating the firm grip. "Thanks for having us, Mr. Crawford." "Bobby, please, Mr. Crawford was my father." He gestured around the venue. "What do you think of the place?" "It's impressive. Bigger than most of the venues we play back home." "Been running this bar for 30 years, Bobby said with evident pride. "Seen a lot of talented musicians come through these doors. Some made it big, most didn't. But I've always had a good ear for talent. And when I heard your demo tape, something clicked. You remind me of the old-school country singers, the ones who sang about real life instead of trying to be something they're not." "That's what I aim for," George said. "I've never been interested in chasing trends. I just want to sing good songs that mean something." Bobby smiled. "That's exactly why I think the folks from MCA are going to pay attention to you. But I won't lie, Bradley Hayes is the main draw for Wednesday night. He's got buzz, he's got looks, and his label is pushing him hard. You're going to have to work twice as hard to make an impression." "I understand." "Good. Now let's get you boys set up for a sound check." They spent the next 3 hours testing equipment, adjusting microphone levels, and working through their set list. The acoustics in the Crossroads were excellent. The brick walls and high ceiling created a warm, resonant sound that made George's voice carry beautifully through the space. As they played through Amarillo by Morning, Bobby stood at the back of the room with his arms crossed, nodding along. When they finished, he walked up to the stage. "That song right there," Bobby said, pointing at George. "That's the one. That's the song that's going to make the executives sit up and pay attention." "You think so?" "I know so. It's got everything. Loneliness, determination, the open road, rodeo life. It's pure country, but it's also universal. Anyone who's ever chased a dream can relate to it." George felt a flicker of hope. "We were planning to put it third in the set." "Good choice. Start with something upbeat to grab them. Hit them with a ballad to show your range, then deliver that one for the knockout punch." Bobby checked his watch. "You boys want to grab some dinner? There's a good barbecue place a few blocks from here. My treat." They took him up on the offer, piling into the van and following Bobby's truck to a small restaurant called Smokey's BBQ. The place was unpretentious. Picnic tables inside and out, order at the counter service, and the mouth-watering smell of slow-cooked meat permeating everything. Over plates of brisket, ribs, coleslaw, and beans, Bobby told them stories about the Nashville music scene, the legends who'd played his bar, the near misses, the one-hit wonders who'd burned bright and faded fast. "The music business is brutal," Bobby said, wiping barbecue sauce from his fingers with a napkin. "For every success story, there are 1,000 heartbreaks. But you know what separates the ones who make it from the ones who don't? It's not always talent. Sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's luck. But most of the time, it's persistence. The ones who make it are the ones who keep showing up, keep improving, keep believing even when everyone tells them to quit. "What made you want to help us?" George asked. "You don't know us. We're just another band from Texas." Bobby leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "When I was your age, I had dreams of being a musician too. Had a decent voice, could play guitar well enough, but I didn't have the discipline, didn't have the drive. I gave up too easy. So instead, I opened a bar where I could help other people chase their dreams. Every time I see talent that reminds me of what country music used to be, what it should be, I do what I can to give it a platform." "We appreciate it more than you know," Danny said. "Just make sure you give it everything you've got Wednesday night," Bobby replied. "Because I'm putting my reputation on the line telling these MCA folks that they need to hear you." The weight of that statement settled over the table like a heavy blanket. It wasn't just George's career on the line, it was Bobby's credibility with the industry contacts he'd spent decades cultivating. They returned to the motel as evening fell over Nashville. George sat on the bed and called Norma again, needing to hear her voice, needing the reassurance that only she could provide. "How'd the sound check go?" she asked after they'd exchanged greetings. "Good. The venue is great. Bobby's been really helpful, but..." He trailed off. "But what?" "Bradley Hayes is headlining. He's the hot new thing everyone's talking about. I'm just the opening act. George Strait, you listen to me." Norma's voice took on that firm tone that meant business. "You are not just anything. You're one of the most talented singers I've ever heard. And I didn't marry you because you were going to be ordinary. Now, I want you to stop comparing yourself to Bradley Hayes or anyone else and focus on being the best George Strait you can be. That's all you can control." She was right, of course. She was always right. "I don't deserve you," he said softly. "Well, you're stuck with me anyway. Now go get some rest. Big day tomorrow. You need to rehearse and get your mind right." After hanging up, George lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of Nashville at night. Somewhere in this city, Bradley Hayes was probably sleeping peacefully, confident in his talent and his trajectory. Somewhere, music executives were planning their schedules, deciding which showcases to attend, which artists to sign, which careers to make or break. And here he was, George Strait from Texas, betting everything on 30 minutes on a stage in a bar called The Crossroads, hoping that tradition and authenticity still mattered in an industry that seemed to value flash over substance. Tomorrow, they would rehearse. Wednesday, they would perform. And after that, well, after that, they'd find out if persistence and talent were enough, or if they'd become just another cautionary tale in Nashville's long history of broken dreams. Tuesday arrived with a thunderstorm that seemed to shake the entire city. Rain hammered against the motel windows, and lightning split the sky with electric fury. George stood at the window, watching water pour from the gutters, wondering if the weather was some kind of omen. "Biblical out there," Ron commented from his bed, where he was tuning his fiddle. "Hope it clears up by tomorrow." "Forecast says it will," Danny offered, looking up from the notebook where he'd been writing out their set list for the 15th time. "Should be clear by Wednesday afternoon." They spent the morning in the motel room, going over arrangements, discussing every musical detail until they'd exhausted every topic. Around noon, the rain finally began to ease, and they decided to head back to the Crossroads for another rehearsal. Bobby was there when they arrived, but he wasn't alone. A woman sat at the bar, Katie Nelson, the singer-songwriter scheduled to perform between George and Bradley Hayes. She was in her late 20s, with long brown hair, warm eyes, and a guitar case propped against the bar stool beside her. "George, guys, come meet Katie," Bobby called out. Katie turned and smiled. "You must be the band from Texas. Bobby's been talking you up pretty heavily." "Hope we can live up to the hype," George said, shaking her hand. "I heard part of your sound check yesterday," Katie said. "You've got a great voice, very classic country. It's refreshing, actually. Most of what I hear these days sounds like country-flavored pop music." "That's kind of what we're trying to counter," George admitted. "Not that there's anything wrong with evolution, but I think there's still a place for traditional country." "Agreed." Katie picked up her guitar. "You mind if I do a quick sound check before you start rehearsing?" "Go ahead." Katie took the stage and began playing a song she'd written called Nashville Dreams. Her voice was pure and haunting, her guitar work delicate and precise. The lyrics spoke of a young woman who'd left everything behind to chase musical stardom, only to discover that the dream was harder and lonelier than she'd ever imagined. When she finished, George found himself applauding genuinely. "That was beautiful. You write all your own material?" "Most of it," Katie said, setting her guitar down. "Trying to get a publishing deal, but mostly I'm just playing wherever I can. This showcase is a big deal for me too. I'm hoping somebody notices." "They will," George assured her. "That song alone should get you attention." They took turns using the stage, each act getting an hour to fine-tune their performance. George and his band worked through their set list 3 times, making small adjustments to tempo and dynamics. By the time they finished, the rain had stopped completely, and late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds. Bobby ordered pizza for everyone, and they sat around the bar, talking music and swapping stories. Katie was from Kentucky originally, had moved to Nashville 2 years earlier with nothing but a guitar and $500. She'd been living in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, working as a waitress while playing open mic nights and writing songs constantly. "You ever think about giving up?" Michael asked her. Katie laughed. "About 3 times a week. But then, something happens. Somebody tells me they connected with one of my songs, or I write something that feels really good. And I remember why I'm doing this. It's not really about fame or money. It's about creating something that matters, you know?" George knew exactly what she meant. That was why he kept pushing forward, despite the setbacks, the financial struggles, the time away from his family. Music wasn't just what he did. It was who he was. As evening approached, Bobby's cell phone rang. He answered, his expression shifting from pleasant to concerned. "What? When did this happen?" He listened for a moment longer. "No, I understand. Yes, we'll figure something out. Take care." He hung up and looked at the assembled musicians with obvious distress. That was Bradley Hayes' manager. Bradley's father had a heart attack this morning. He's stable, but Bradley's flying back to Georgia tonight to be with his family. He's canceling the showcase. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't detonated yet. Katie's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, is his father going to be okay?" "They think so, but Bradley needs to be there. And I completely understand that. Family comes first." Bobby ran his hand through his silver hair. "But this creates a hell of a problem for tomorrow night. The MCA executives are coming specifically to see Bradley. Without a headliner, they might not come at all," Danny finished grimly. "Or they'll show up, stay for 20 minutes, and leave." Bobby looked genuinely distraught. "I promised them a full showcase, a complete evening. Without Bradley, we don't have enough to fill the time." George's mind was racing. This was disaster. The whole trip, all the preparation, the money they'd spent getting here. It could all be for nothing if the executives decided the showcase wasn't worth their time. Katie spoke up hesitantly. "I could do a longer set. I've got plenty of songs." "That helps," Bobby said. "But we're still short. Bradley was supposed to do 45 minutes to an hour. Even if I extend everyone's sets, We're looking at maybe 90 minutes total. That's not enough to make it feel like a real event. An idea began forming in George's mind, crazy and terrifying in equal measure. What if? He paused, not quite believing he was about to suggest this. What if we did the full show? What if my band did both the opening set and the headlining set? Everyone turned to stare at him. Danny's eyes were wide. George, that's insane? George finished. Maybe, but think about it. Instead of 30 minutes, we do an hour and a half. We go on first, like planned, do our regular set. Then Katie does her set. Then we come back and do a full headlining show. We've got enough material. We could do it. Bobby was studying him intently. You sure you want to take that on? That's a lot of pressure. I know. But what's the alternative? We came all this way. I've got a wife and kids back home counting on me. You've got your reputation on the line. If we don't put on a show worth watching, we all lose. He's right, Katie said quietly. If the executives show up and it's half-assed, we're all done. But if George can pull off a full evening, she looked at him with respect. That actually shows something. Shows endurance, versatility, commitment. Ron, Michael, and James were in a huddle, whispering urgently. Finally, Ron spoke up. If George is crazy enough to try it, we're crazy enough to back him up. Bobby pulled out his phone. Give me a few minutes. Let me call the MCA folks and explain the situation. See if they're still interested. He walked outside to make the call, while George and his bandmates looked at each other with a mixture of excitement and terror. They were really doing this. Instead of a safe 30-minute set, they were going to attempt to carry an entire showcase on their shoulders. We need to plan this out, Danny said, his organizational mind already working. We can't just repeat the same songs twice. We need to think about the arc of the whole evening. They huddled around the bar, grabbing napkins to scribble on. For the opening set, they'd stick with the plan. High-energy songs to grab attention. But the second set, the headlining set, needed to be different. It needed to show depth, to take the audience on a journey. We need to include more ballads in the second set, George said. Show emotional range. And we should do some covers too. Show respect for the tradition we're coming from. George Jones? James suggested. Perfect. And maybe some Merle Haggard. Songs everyone knows, but we can put our own spin on. Katie joined their planning session, offering suggestions from an audience perspective. You should tell stories between songs, she said. Connect with people. Let them see who you are beyond just the voice. Bobby returned after 15 minutes, and his expression was impossible to read. Everyone held their breath. They're still coming, he finally said, and the collective exhale was audible. I explained the situation, and they respect that you're willing to step up. But, he paused significantly, they said you'd better be good. Really good. Because if they drive all the way out here, and it's a waste of their time, that's the end of any relationship I have with MCA. No pressure at all, Ron muttered. We won't let you down, George said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. We'll give them a show they'll remember. They stayed at the crossroads until late that night, rehearsing extended sets, arguing about song order, fine-tuning every transition. Katie watched for a while before heading home, but not before giving George a hug. Good luck tomorrow, she said. I'll be rooting for you. When they finally stumbled back to the motel around midnight, George was exhausted but wired with nervous energy. He called Norma, even though it was late. I was waiting for your call, she said immediately. I knew something was happening. I could feel it. He explained everything. The cancellation, the opportunity, the plan, the stakes. George, she said when he finished, this is it. This is your moment. Everything you've worked for, everything we've sacrificed, It all comes down to tomorrow night. I know, and I'm scared to death that I'm going to mess it up. You won't. You know why? Because you're not trying to be something you're not. You're not trying to impress anyone or play a character. You're just going to be George Strait, singing country music the way it's supposed to be sung. And that's enough. That's more than enough. I love you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I love you too. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow you're going to show Nashville what real country music sounds like. After hanging up, George lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through set lists and lyrics. Tomorrow night, he would step onto that stage not as an opening act filling time, but as the main event. Everything he'd worked for, every honky-tonk gig, every small-town dance hall, every night away from his family, it had all been leading to this moment. Either he would rise to the occasion and prove that traditional country music still had a place in the modern industry, or he would fail spectacularly in front of the very people who could make or break his career. There was no middle ground anymore. Wednesday arrived with crystalline clarity. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean, leaving behind a blue expanse unmarred by clouds. George woke early, his stomach churning with anticipation and fear. Today was the day. He showered, dressed carefully in his best jeans, a pressed white shirt, and his good boots, the ones Norma had bought him for their anniversary. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The man staring back looked older than his 38 years, weathered by years of struggle and hope deferred. Danny knocked on the adjoining door between their rooms. You ready for breakfast? Not sure I can eat. You need to eat. Long day ahead. They found the same diner from Monday, but this time George could barely taste the food. His mind kept jumping ahead to the evening, running through the set list, worrying about everything that could go wrong. Stop overthinking, James said, pointing his fork at George. You've done this 1,000 times. It's just another show. It's not just another show, George replied. It's everything. Then treat it like just another show anyway, Michael advised. The minute you make it too big in your head, that's when you freeze up. Just focus on the music, one song at a time. They were right, of course. George forced himself to finish his eggs and drink his coffee. They had a few hours before they needed to be at the crossroads for final preparations. Danny suggested they drive around Nashville, see some of the historic sites, try to relax. They visited the Ryman Auditorium, the mother church of country music, and stood outside looking at the building where legends had performed. Maybe someday, Ron said quietly, and no one disagreed. By 3 o'clock, they couldn't put it off any longer. They loaded the van and headed to the crossroads. Bobby's truck was already there, along with several other vehicles. Inside, they found Bobby directing a small crew who were setting up additional lighting and adjusting the sound system. Wanted everything to be perfect, Bobby explained. The executives are supposed to arrive around 7. We'll start the show at 7:30. You'll open, Katie will go second. Then you'll close out the night. Katie arrived shortly after, looking nervous but determined. How are you feeling? She asked George. Terrified. You? Same, but also excited. This feels like one of those moments, you know? Like something's going to change tonight, one way or another. They spent the next few hours in preparation. A final sound check, a rehearsal of key transitions, and endless trips to the bathroom as nerves manifested physically. Bobby had arranged for a local catering company to set up a buffet, and a bar staff of 3 began arriving to handle drink orders. By 6:30, the first audience members began trickling in. Bobby had invited local musicians, industry folks, and regular customers. He wanted the room full, wanted energy and atmosphere. By 7 o'clock, the crossroads was packed with at least 150 people, all buzzing with anticipation. George stood backstage, really just a small area behind black curtains, watching the crowd through a gap. His hands were shaking slightly, and his mouth was dry despite drinking 3 bottles of water. "They're here," Danny whispered urgently. "The MCA guys just walked in." George peeked through the curtain. 3 men in business casual attire were being greeted by Bobby near the entrance. They looked exactly like what George imagined record executives would look like. Confident, assessing, slightly bored. These were men who'd seen 1,000 acts, heard 10,000 songs. They held his future in their hands, and they didn't even know his name yet. Bobby took the stage at 7:30 sharp. "Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Crossroads. We've got a special showcase tonight featuring some incredible talent. But first, I want to explain that we had a last-minute change in the lineup. Bradley Hayes had a family emergency and couldn't make it tonight. Please keep him and his family in your thoughts." A murmur ran through the crowd. Bobby continued, "But we're lucky to have George Strait and the ace in the whole band from Texas stepping up to not only open the show, but also to close it out with a full headlining set. These guys represent everything I love about country music: authenticity, tradition, and raw talent. So please give them a warm Nashville welcome." Applause filled the room as Bobby exited the stage. This was it. No more delays, no more preparation. Just George, his band, and 30 minutes to make a first impression. George walked onto the stage, guitar strap over his shoulder, and approached the microphone. The lights were bright. The crowd was watching. And somewhere in that sea of faces were 3 men who could change his life. "Good evening, folks," he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "We're honored to be here tonight. This first song is about losing control, but we promise to keep things under control up here. This is Unwound." Danny counted them in, and they launched into the opening number. The upbeat tempo got people moving immediately, and George felt some of his nervousness evaporate as he lost himself in the performance. His voice felt strong, the band was tight, and the audience was responding positively. They transitioned into Fool-Hearted Memory, and George could see people in the crowd swaying to the ballad. This was the song that always got to him. It was about heartbreak and regret, about the memories that haunt you long after a relationship ends. He sang it thinking of all the sacrifices his family had made, all the nights away, all the times he doubted whether he was doing the right thing. When they hit Amarillo by morning, something magical happened. The song spoke of rodeo life, of endless traveling, of chasing a dream that always seemed just out of reach. But it wasn't sad. It was determined, hopeful, proud. As George sang about being so tired but not wanting to miss a single thing, he felt a connection with the audience that transcended mere performance. He glanced toward where the MCA executives sat. They were leaning forward slightly, paying attention. One of them was nodding along to the music. They finished their opening set with "Nobody in His Right Mind Would Have Left Her," a song about letting love slip away through foolishness. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic as they took their bows and exited the stage. Bobby found them backstage, grinning. "That was fantastic. I saw the MCA guys. They were into it, really into it. Now we just have to do it all over again in an hour," George said, accepting a bottle of water from Danny. Katie took the stage next, and her performance was stunning. She had the crowd mesmerized with her songwriting and her voice. George watched from the side, impressed and happy for her. This was what showcases were supposed to be: a celebration of talent and artistry. When Katie finished to thunderous applause, there was a brief intermission while the stage was reset. George and his band huddled together. "All right," George said. "This is it, the headlining set. We've worked our entire lives for this moment. Let's show them what traditional country music can do." They retook the stage at 9 o'clock. The crowd had grown even larger. Word had spread during the intermission, and people from other bars had wandered in to see what the commotion was about. The crossroads was absolutely packed now. Standing room only. "Thank you all for sticking around," George said into the microphone. "For this next set, we want to take you on a journey through country music, where it's been and where we think it can still go. We're going to mix our own songs with some classics from the artists who inspired us, and we hope you'll come along for the ride." They opened with "The Cowboy Rides Away," a song George had written about letting go and moving on. The Western imagery and the melancholy melody showcased a different side of his artistry. From there, they flowed into a cover of George Jones's "The Grand Tour," paying homage to one of country music's greatest voices. George began telling stories between songs, about growing up in Texas, about the honky-tonks where he'd learned his craft, about the night he met Norma and knew immediately she was the one. He made the audience laugh with anecdotes about life on the road, and he made them thoughtful with reflections on what country music meant to him. "This music," he said during one break, "it's not about being trendy or cool. It's about truth. It's about singing about real life. The heartbreaks and the celebrations, the struggles and the victories. It's about connecting with people over shared experiences. That's what country music has always been, and that's what it should always be." The crowd erupted in applause, and George saw several people nodding emphatically in agreement. They performed a mix of upbeat numbers and ballads, covers and originals. Ron's fiddle work was spectacular, Danny's steel guitar weeping and soaring, and the rhythm section keeping everything grounded. But the focus was George's voice. That clear, traditional country tone that sounded like it had been teleported from 1950s honky-tonks straight into 1981 Nashville. An hour into the set, George paused. "We've got one more song for you tonight. This one's called Amarillo by Morning, and some of you heard it during our opening set. But I want to do it again, because this song is about never giving up. It's about waking up every morning and chasing your dreams, even when you're broke, even when you're tired, even when everyone tells you to quit. It's about doing what you love, because you can't imagine doing anything else." The crowd was silent, hanging on his words. "My wife Norma is back home in Texas right now with our kids. She's been supporting this dream of mine for years, working hard while I chase something that might never happen. This song is for her, and for everyone out there who believes in somebody else's dream, even when it seems impossible." He nodded to Danny, and they began playing. But this version was different from the earlier performance. Slower, more intimate, more emotionally raw. George sang like he was baring his soul. Every word weighted with years of hope and struggle and determination. When he hit the final chorus, "I ain't rich, but Lord, I'm free. Amarillo by morning. Amarillo's where I'll be," his voice rang out clear and true, and there wasn't a dry eye in the crossroads. The final note hung in the air for a moment, and then the crowd exploded. People were on their feet, applauding and cheering. George saw the MCA executives standing and clapping along with everyone else. "Thank you," George said into the microphone, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Nashville. Thank you, Bobby Crawford. And thank you all for listening to what country music sounds like when you sing it from the heart." They closed with one final upbeat number, ending the show on a high note. As they took their final bows, George felt something shift inside him. Regardless of what happened with the record deal, regardless of whether the executives signed him, he'd done what he came here to do. He'd shown Nashville, and more importantly, shown himself, that he belonged on that stage. The aftermath of the performance was a blur. The moment George stepped off stage, he was swarmed by people wanting to congratulate him, shake his hand, tell him how much they'd enjoyed the show. Bobby was beaming, Katie was hugging everyone, and the band was riding a high of adrenaline and accomplishment. But George's eyes kept searching the crowd for the three MCA executives. He spotted them near the bar, deep in conversation with Bobby. Their expressions were serious, but not dismissive. They looked engaged, thoughtful, like they were carefully considering something important. "They're talking to Bobby," Danny whispered in his ear. "That's a good sign, right?" "I don't know. Maybe they're just being polite." "George Strait, you just played the show of your life. And you're worried they're being polite?" Danny had a point. George forced himself to breathe, to center himself. Whatever happened next, he'd given everything he had. There were no regrets about the performance itself. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, Bobby waved George over. His heart hammering, George made his way through the crowd to where the executives stood. "George," Bobby said, his voice carefully neutral, but his eyes twinkling, "I'd like you to meet David Harrison, Steve Martinez, and Paul Jennings from MCA Records." George shook each of their hands. David Harrison, who appeared to be the senior member of the group, spoke first. "That was quite a performance, Mr. Strait. Very impressive." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate you coming out tonight." "Bobby tells us you stepped up to headline at the last minute," Steve Martinez said. "That took guts, especially for someone who's relatively unknown." "I saw it as an opportunity," George replied honestly. "A chance to show what we can do. And you certainly did that." Paul Jennings pulled out a business card. "We'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning at our offices. Say, 10 o'clock. We want to discuss some possibilities." George took the card with a hand that was suddenly shaking again. "Yes, sir. Absolutely. We'll be there." "Excellent. Looking forward to continuing this conversation." The three executives nodded politely and made their way toward the exit, leaving George standing with Bobby in a state of shock. "Did that just happen?" George asked. Bobby threw his arm around George's shoulders. "That just happened. They want a meeting. Do you know what that means? It means they're interested. It means you just went from opening act to serious prospect in one night. I've been doing this a long time, George, and I've never seen executives respond to a new artist like that." The rest of the evening was a celebration. Someone bought rounds of drinks for the band. Musicians they'd never met came up to compliment them, and Katie insisted on taking a photo with everyone to commemorate the night. George finally found a quiet corner and called Norma. It was nearly 11:30, but he knew she'd be waiting by the phone. She answered on the first ring. "Tell me everything." He did, the words tumbling out in a rush. The nervousness, the performance, the audience response, the executives, the meeting tomorrow morning. When he finished, there was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Norma? You there?" "I'm here." Her voice was thick with tears. "I'm just so proud of you, George. So incredibly proud. I knew you could do it. I always knew. I couldn't have done it without you. Every note I sang tonight, I was thinking about you and the kids, about all the sacrifices you've made, and it was worth it. All of it was worth it." They talked for another 20 minutes before Norma insisted he get some rest for the morning meeting. After hanging up, George rejoined his bandmates, who were still riding the high of the evening. "Group of us are going out," Ron said. "You coming?" George shook his head. "You guys go ahead. I need to clear my head. Think about tomorrow." Danny decided to stay back with George, and they ended up sitting at the bar long after most people had left. Bobby poured them each a whiskey on the house. "To taking chances," Bobby said, raising his glass. "To taking chances," George and Danny echoed. You know what impressed me most tonight? Bobby asked. It wasn't just the talent, though God knows you've got plenty of that. It was the authenticity. Every word you sang, every story you told, it all came from a real place. These days, so many artists are manufactured, packaged, told what to sing and how to look. But you're the real deal, George. That's what those executives saw tonight. I hope you're right. I am right. Trust me. I've been wrong about a lot of things in my life, but I'm not wrong about this. They finished their drinks and said their goodbyes. Back at the motel, George lay in bed replaying the entire evening in his mind. The nervousness before the show, the moment the first notes rang out, the connection with the audience, the way the room had felt during Amarillo by morning, the executive's request for a meeting. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, negotiating, discussing contracts, trying not to seem too desperate, while also making clear how much he wanted this opportunity. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, George allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, all the struggle had been leading somewhere. The next morning, George woke early and dressed in his best clothes. The same outfit from the night before, freshly pressed. The band piled into the van and Danny navigated them to the MCA Records offices in downtown Nashville. The building was modern and professional, a far cry from the honky-tonks and bars where George had spent most of his career. They checked in with reception and were escorted to a conference room on the 4th floor. David Harrison, Steve Martinez, and Paul Jennings were already there, along with 2 other people. A woman introduced as Leslie Chen from Artist Development, and a man named Richard Foster from the legal department. "Thanks for coming in," David said, gesturing for everyone to sit. "We wanted to follow up on last night's performance and discuss what a potential partnership might look like." What followed was 2 hours of conversation about George's musical vision, the current state of country music, market trends, and what MCA could offer in terms of production, distribution, and promotion. The executives made it clear that they were impressed, but also cautious. Traditional country music was a risk in an increasingly pop-influenced market. "We believe in your talent," Steve said carefully, "but we need to be honest about the challenges. Radio is moving away from traditional country. We'd need to find the right songs, the right production approach, the right way to position you." "I'm not interested in compromising who I am," George said firmly. "I won't pretend to be something I'm not, just to fit a trend." "We're not asking you to," David replied. "In fact, what we saw last night is exactly what we want to preserve. But we do need to be strategic about how we present it to the market." Leslie Chen spoke up. "What if we positioned you as the antidote to everything else on country radio? The pure country alternative for people who miss the traditional sound?" "That could work," Paul mused. "There's definitely an audience for it. We saw that last night. People are hungry for authenticity." They discussed potential producers, recording timelines, and contract terms. Richard Foster explained the standard artist agreement, emphasizing that MCA wanted a long-term relationship, not just a single album deal. "We're talking about building a career," David said. "We think you have staying power, George. You're not a flash-in-the-pan trend artist. You're someone who could be relevant for decades if we do this right." By the time the meeting ended, George's head was spinning with information and possibilities. They hadn't signed anything yet. Richard insisted that George take time to review the contract terms, preferably with his own lawyer. But the intention was clear. MCA Records wanted to sign George Strait. "Take the weekend," David said, as they stood to leave. "Talk it over with your wife, review everything with a legal professional, and let's reconvene Monday morning if everything looks good to you." George shook hands with each executive, trying to maintain composure, even though he wanted to shout with joy. "Thank you. This means more than you know." "Thank you for an unforgettable performance," Leslie said warmly. "I've been in this business 15 years, and I rarely see something that genuine." Outside the building, the band erupted in celebration the moment they reached the van. Ron was hollering, James was dancing, Michael was laughing so hard he was crying. Danny grabbed George in a bear hug. "We did it! We actually did it!" George couldn't stop smiling. "We still need to review the contract. Make sure the terms are fair." "George, stop," Danny said, gripping his shoulders. "Just for 1 minute, stop being practical and let yourself feel this. You're about to get a record deal with MCA. Do you understand how huge that is?" He did. He absolutely did. But years of disappointment had taught him to be cautious with hope, to not celebrate until everything was signed and official. They drove back to the crossroads to share the news with Bobby, who was in his office doing paperwork. When George told him about the meeting, Bobby's face split into the biggest grin George had ever seen. "I knew it! Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say they were interested?" Bobby came around his desk and pulled George into a hug. "This is what it's all about, son. This is why I do what I do. To see talent get recognized. We couldn't have done it without you giving us this opportunity," George said sincerely. "You did the hard part. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and showed them what you're capable of." Bobby pulled out a bottle of bourbon from his desk drawer. "This calls for a celebration drink." They toasted to success, to music, to taking chances. Katie stopped by later in the afternoon. She'd had a meeting with a publishing company that morning, and they'd offered her a songwriting deal. The showcase had been a success for everyone involved. "We should stay in touch," Katie said to George. "Maybe I could write some songs for you once you start recording." "I'd like that," George replied. "Your songwriting is special." That evening, George called Norma with the news. She cried, he cried, and they talked about what this could mean for their family. Financial stability, the ability to support themselves through music, validation for all the years of struggle. "When are you coming home?" she asked. "We'll leave tomorrow morning. I want to get back to you and the kids. We'll review the contract over the weekend. And if everything looks good, I'll come back to Nashville on Monday to sign. I can't wait to see you. The kids keep asking when Daddy's coming home. Tell them soon. Tell them Daddy might actually be able to make this music thing work out." Friday morning, they loaded up the van one final time and began the long drive back to Texas. The atmosphere was completely different from the anxious journey to Nashville. Now there was laughter, excitement, and endless discussion about what the future might hold. "You think they'll let us record in Texas?" Ron asked. "Or will we have to move to Nashville?" "Don't know yet," George admitted. "Lot of details to work out." "What about touring?" Michael wondered. "If the album does well, we could be on the road a lot." These were good problems to have, George thought. Just a week ago, he'd been wondering if this trip would be another dead end. Now he was worrying about how to manage success. They made it back to San Marcos by Saturday evening. When George pulled into his driveway and saw Norma waiting on the porch, he felt emotion well up in his chest. She ran to him as he climbed out of the van, and they held each other for a long moment. "Let me look at you," she said, stepping back. "You look different, more confident." "I feel different." Like maybe all those years of doubt were finally washed away. Their children came running out, Jennifer, who was 9, and George Jr., who was 7. They crashed into their father, nearly knocking him over with their enthusiasm. "Daddy, did you become famous?" Jennifer asked. George laughed, picking her up. "Not yet, sweetheart, but maybe someday." That weekend was a whirlwind of activity. George found a lawyer who specialized in entertainment contracts, a friend of a friend who agreed to review the MCA agreement. On Sunday afternoon, They sat in the lawyer's office going over every clause, every term, every obligation. "It's a solid contract," the lawyer said finally. "Standard terms for a new artist. The advance isn't huge, but it's fair. The royalty structure is reasonable, and you retain creative control over song selection, which is crucial. I'd say this is a good deal, George. So, I should sign it? From a legal standpoint, yes, but only you can decide if this is what you want. This is going to change your life. Are you ready for that?" George thought about it. Signing this contract meant committing to the music industry fully, meant trusting that MCA would support his vision, meant potentially being away from home even more than he already was. But it also meant finally having the platform to share his music with a wider audience, meant financial security for his family, meant validating every sacrifice they'd all made. "I'm ready," he said. Monday morning, George boarded a plane to Nashville, his first time flying for business rather than just getting somewhere cheaply. MCA had sent him a ticket, treating him like a professional artist rather than a struggling musician. It felt surreal. Danny came with him for moral support. They took a taxi from the airport to the MCA offices, where David Harrison and Richard Foster were waiting with the finalized contract. "Did you have a chance to review everything?" Richard asked. "Yes, sir. My lawyer went through it with me. I have a few minor questions, but overall, I'm ready to proceed." They spent an hour addressing George's questions and making small adjustments to the contract language. Finally, Richard slid the document across the table with a pen. "This is it, George. You sign this, and you're officially an MCA Records artist." George picked up the pen, his hand steady, despite the magnitude of the moment. He thought about the long road that had led here, the honky-tonks, the rejection letters, the canceled gigs, the financial struggles. He thought about Norma's unwavering support, his bandmates' loyalty, Bobby Crawford's faith in him. And he thought about that night at the crossroads when he'd stepped up to break the galho, to fill in, to help out, and ended up creating something special, something that mattered. He signed his name on the line. George Harvey Strait. David Harrison stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to MCA Records, George. Let's make some history together." Over the next few months, everything changed rapidly. George and the band recorded their debut album at a studio in Nashville, working with a producer who understood and respected his traditional country vision. They cut Unwound as the first single, and it was released to country radio in May 1981. The song wasn't an immediate smash hit, but it performed respectably, reaching the top 10 on the country charts. More importantly, it introduced George Strait to a national audience and established his sound. Traditional country with impeccable production and that distinctive voice. The second single, Fool-Hearted Memory, did even better. And by the time the full album was released in September, George had momentum. Critics praised his authentic approach, his respect for country music's roots, and his refusal to chase trends. But the real turning point came when Amarillo by Morning was released as a single in early 1982. The song that Bobby Crawford had identified as special, the song George had performed twice at the Crossroads, connected with audiences in a profound way. It climbed to number 4 on the country charts and became George's signature song. Radio programmers who'd been skeptical about traditional country suddenly had to acknowledge that there was indeed an audience for it. Other artists began incorporating more traditional elements into their music. And George Strait, the guy from Texas who'd just been trying to help out when the headliner canceled, became the face of a movement back to country music's roots. The Ace in the Hole band toured extensively, and George made good on his promise to Norma. He brought her and the kids on the road whenever possible, refusing to let success cost him his family. Danny remained his musical director and closest confidant. Ron, Michael, and James stayed with him for years, becoming an integral part of his sound. Bobby Crawford's bar, the Crossroads, became legendary in Nashville circles as the place where George Strait had his breakthrough. Bobby never charged for the story. He told it free to anyone who'd listen, always emphasizing that success came to those who were willing to take chances and stay true to themselves. Katie Nelson got her songwriting deal and eventually wrote several songs that George recorded, including one that became a #1 hit. She'd occasionally join him on stage for duets, and they remained friends throughout their careers. As for that night in March 1981, the night George Strait stepped up to fill in for Bradley Hayes, it became part of country music lore. People who'd been there told and retold the story, each version slightly embellished, but the core truth remaining constant. A relatively unknown singer had been given an unexpected opportunity and had seized it with both hands, delivering a performance that changed the trajectory of his career and reminded the industry why traditional country music mattered. Years later, when George had become one of the most successful country artists of all time, with dozens of #1 hits and millions of albums sold, interviewers would ask him about that night. He always told the story humbly, crediting luck and timing as much as talent. But those who'd been there, Bobby, Katie, Danny, and the other band members, knew the truth. It hadn't been luck. It had been years of preparation meeting opportunity, authenticity meeting hunger, and talent meeting courage. George Strait hadn't just filled in that night. He'd shown everyone what country music could be when it was honest, when it was real, when it came from the heart. He'd created a moment that transcended a single performance and became a statement about artistic integrity and the enduring power of traditional country music. He'd gone to the Crossroads to break the galho, to help out in a pinch. Instead, he'd created a moment that would be remembered for decades as the night country music found its way back home.